What if I told you there was a system of taxation out there that would be better for everybody and the wealthy do not want you to know about it? I'm Rachel, I'm a public and social policy consultant, and I'm on a mission to scrap council tax. So today we're going to learn about land value tax. It's a system of taxation that could replace council tax, be far simpler than council tax, and would benefit almost everybody except the very wealthy. Now, I can't promise this is going to be a short video, but I can promise this is going to be worth your time. So what's council tax? Council tax in the UK is a form of taxation that we use to pay for locally delivered services. So education, social care, transport, waste services, that kind of thing. It comes from council tax. It's collected by your local council and it's spent by your local council in your local area for those services. We calculate council tax and how much that you owe your council through the value of the property you live in. Now, whether you rent that property, own multiple properties, it's the house that you live in as an individual. That's how we calculate how much council tax you owe. Council tax is almost completely unchanged since 1993. One of the reasons that it's almost completely unchanged is because to change it would expose some of its flaws. But Rachel, its flaws are obvious. Some of its flaws are obvious, yes, but we focus too much on the design of council tax and why it's crappy and not the actual tax itself. So yes, council tax is regressive, which is its biggest issue. And that means that people with less pay more and people with more pay less. So the council tax in Kensington and Chelsea is cheaper than it is in Newcastle upon Tyne, one of the wealthiest areas in the country and one of the poorest areas in the country, and it's flipped. So the poor pay more and the wealthy pay less. On top of that, there's lots of discounts and exemptions available, but they kind of don't really address the problem. There is something called council tax support, but that is an absolute postcode lottery. I've done another video on it, and it's also massively regressive, with poorer areas having harsher schemes because they can't afford to be more generous. And that's all before we start looking at debt, which currently stands at about £6.5 billion, which is money councils don't have, and which is money councils are chasing you for through really quite harsh debt collection practices, the worst of which is through enforcement agents. So what's land value tax? Well, land value tax is a similar principle, but it's different. Council tax taxes the property that you live in. Land value tax would tax the land that that property sits on. How is this different? Land is only good if you build on top of it. Kind of. Let's think of it not as land, but location. The location in which something is built is what dictates its value, not the property itself. This is why you could buy a mansion in the northwest for less than the price of a studio flat in the centre of London. The great big lovely house in the northwest is more beautiful, it's bigger, it offers greater opportunities for the people who live in it, but the studio flat in London is worth more because of its location, because of the land, because of where the land is that studio flat is built on. That's what makes it valuable, not the property itself. Land is a natural monopoly. What that means is that we didn't actually make it. There is a very fixed amount of it. You can't take it with you. You can't kind of reduce its demand. But what you can do is build services and functioning societies on top of that land. And that's what makes that land more valuable. So public infrastructure, public tax money, the services, the education, the schools, the access and availability of great jobs in London and not elsewhere. That's what makes that location valuable. Not anything that the landowner did, but all of the public infrastructure and taxation and public services that were ploughed into that location. Meanwhile, the person who owns the land that everything sits on top of gets wealthier and wealthier because that location becomes more valuable. If you're a homeowner in the UK, you may own the land that your house sits on. You may have a freehold on your property, which means you own the footprint that your house sits on, and that's it. If your property is leasehold, you actually don't own the land that your property sits on. Somebody else does. And some people hold lots and lots of land. Take the Duke of Westminster. He owns land which is roughly about twice the size of Liverpool, and he owns land in some extremely valuable locations, like underneath the heart of London. But land is just dirt. While mining and minerals aside, you can make money from land in a couple of different ways. But fundamentally, you can ask for rent for people living or occupying your land, or you can use that land as a capital asset and you can borrow against it and generate your wealth that way. This is how multi-generational families, land-owning gentry become wealthy beyond anything that most people can comprehend. And it's all in the land. Land value tax would recognise this, and it would recognise that the value of a location is in its land and not its property. So if we taxed land and not property, it would flip from being a regressive tax. Actually, it would make it a progressive tax, meaning that the wealthier would pay more because their land, the location that their land is worth more. There are some really common arguments against land value tax, and one of the first ones is the rich will leave. We hear this a lot. The Green Party are talking about wealth taxes in particular, and we hear very, very frequently, quite boringly, the rich will leave. Well, if we implemented land value tax, they are welcome to leave, because the tax would still be due on that asset. That asset is the land, and they cannot take that land with them. So that tax bill becomes due from whichever private island they land on. They will need to pay their tax from there. And just like any other bad debt, if they don't pay, we seize the asset, just like we do with people living in abject poverty over council tax. We will send the enforcement agents around and we will take that asset and sell it to somebody who is willing to pay tax on it. The next argument after that is, but then the values will crash and all property will crash and everything will crash. No, it won't. The value of that land doesn't become any less valuable because somebody else owns it. What it might mean, and let's use really basic maths for this. Let's say the land underneath London, the land that the Duke of Westminster owns, is worth £10. I know it's not, it's like 10 billion, but let's say it's £10. When the Duke of Westminster does not pay his land tax bill, we can sell his land worth £10 to somebody else for £10. If there isn't anybody else willing to pay £10 for it, we can sell it to 10 people for £1, or 100 people for 10 pence, or 1,000 people for a penny. And 1,000 people paying tax on something worth a penny is the same as one person paying tax on something worth £10. So when we say values will crash, what we mean is wealth will crash for certain individuals, not that the value of the actual land will devalue in any way. But how will this affect property? It won't. Property is not what we're taxing here. The house in London is still subject to all of the crazy London prices that you have down there. It's still an extremely valuable location to live and to work. And that is why it's harder to rent. It's harder to buy. It's all because of the location. But it's just land. Who cares? Well, the very wealthy care a lot, because as well as being unable to take it with them, if we seize that asset, they don't have that asset with which to back up their great amounts of wealth. There are other arguments, pros and cons for land value tax, and a whole replacement of taxation might be a little bit too much for a TikTok video. But it's important that we understand these things. It's important that we understand that there is a system of taxation out there that would be better for almost everybody except the very, very wealthy. Council tax has got to go. We need better policy.